Hello, and welcome to this fourth lesson in a six-lesson series on the life of David. In this lesson, we'll be looking into 2 Samuel chapter 9 and look at the relationship between David and Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. However, before we do look that far ahead, we need to go back and do a little review and look at the relationships that David has built with Saul's family and David's relationship with Saul. If you remember, Saul was initially anointed king by Samuel at God's instruction. It's been almost 350 years since Joshua's death. Israel has had no king, and we had that period that's covered by the book of Judges in which they would again and again and again fall victim to the oppression of their neighbors, cry out for a judge. God would raise a judge to deliver them. Once they were delivered, as long as a judge was alive, they'd serve God, and then they'd go right back to their old ways of serving the gods of their neighbors, more oppression, and then the rise of another judge. After that long period of time, Samuel, the last of the judges and a prophet in his own right, was asked by the people to give them a king. They wanted a king so they could be like everybody else. There had been no one ruler of all the tribes of Israel during this whole period of the judges. Samuel, obeying God's instruction then, anointed Saul as king, and Saul was 30 years old when he was anointed. And we're told by the scriptures that he served some 42 years before his death. Saul was initially very successful in leading the army of Israel against the Ammonites. Then when he faced some opposition from the Philistines, he became impatient as he waited for Samuel the prophet to come and offer a burnt sacrifice on behalf of the people of Israel. When Samuel was late in coming, Saul's men were beginning to leave and go back home, and so Saul did that which he should not have done. He went and said, "I'll burn the offering myself," and he offered the burnt sacrifice, which he should not have done. Samuel delivered God's rebuke. 1 Samuel 13, verse 13. "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command." This was the first time that we have the record of Saul disappointing God. Saul and his men went ahead and fought the Philistines and defeated the Philistines. And then the Amalekites. See, all these neighbors were just attacking the cities of Israel. The Amalekites attacked. Through Samuel, God told Saul that they should go ahead and attack the Amalekites, but God gave specific instructions through Samuel. The instructions included that they should kill every man, woman, child, and every animal of the Amalekites. Well, Saul and his army did defeat the Amalekites, but they spared King Agag of the Amalekites, and they also spared some of the choice cattle and sheep and goats, they said, to use as sacrifices. When Samuel comes to visit Saul, Saul bragged about how we've kept God's command. And Samuel asked him, "Well, what is the bleating of the sheep that I hear?" Samuel once again rebukes Saul. 1 Samuel 15, 26. "But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel." As Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe and tore it. Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." So now again, God has rejected Saul as king. Samuel goes back to Bethlehem, and that's where he anoints David as the new king. David, when we looked in that lesson, we said he was somewhere between 10 and 15 years old when that happened. Then the scriptures tell us that the Spirit of God departed from Saul, and Saul became very depressed. And during these periods of depression, he would have David come in, because David was a very gifted musician, could play the harp and the lyre, and he would have David come and play to help soothe his spirit. Soon, David became a regular attendant at the court, and Saul made David one of his armor bearers. When While he was at the court, David made close friendships with Saul's son. Now, Jonathan, Saul's son, was the heir apparent, yet he made a covenant with David in which he gave David his tunic and his belt and his sword, all a sign of giving to him what would be the symbols of royalty, that he should be the next king. Saul would send David into battle with his army, and David was always very successful, and everyone noticed it. The other soldiers, the townspeople. In fact, it's recorded in 1 Samuel 18. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and timbrels and lyres. And they danced. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Well, this only caused Saul to get jealous, and he tried to kill David. Once, while David was playing the harp, he tried to kill him with a spear. Saul would send David off with the army, and hoping that the enemy would kill David in battle. But David was all the more successful and drew all the more attention. Saul's daughter, Michal, fell in love with David, and they were married. For a dowry, Saul asked David for 100 Philistine foreskins, thinking that if David went out and tried to kill 100 Philistines, surely one of them would kill him. Well, David returned with 200 foreskins and married Saul's daughter. Saul planned to kill David. However, when Jonathan realized this, Jonathan warned David to stay away. Saul sent men to David's house to capture David so he could kill him. Saul's daughter, David's wife, betrayed her father and actually deceived the soldiers so they didn't know that David was there, and then helped him escape. Jonathan warned David that his father was intending to kill him, and so David had to flee from Saul. At first, he hides and takes refuge in different places in Israel. Then he goes to Gath, which was a Philistine city. He wasn't there very long, and when the Philistines weren't as accepting, he played like he was insane, and then got away and went back into the plain of South Judah to hide. He's hiding there, and then eventually leaves the plain in South Judah and goes further east on the other side of the Dead Sea over to Moab. So he's hiding with the enemy, trying to avoid Saul finding him and killing him. While he is in Moab, the Philistines attacked a city in the southern highlands of Judah, south of Bethlehem, there, a city of Keilah. David hears about it, and he goes over to Gibeah and attacks the Philistines and saves the city from the Philistine assault. When Saul hears that David is down at Keilah defending the city, he then goes to Keilah to find David. When David hears that Saul's on his way to Keilah, David flees back to the east, back over toward the Dead Sea, and goes into the area of En-Gedi. It was in this area of En-Gedi that David was hiding in the cave, and in the last lesson we looked at what happened when Saul came into the cave and David had his chance to kill him, but didn't kill him. David continues his fleeing after Saul, sparing Saul's life. Saul goes back home. David continues to flee. Once again, have an instance where Saul's men are looking for David. David finds where they are camping and goes into Saul's camp while Saul's asleep and goes over right next to where Saul is sleeping and takes his spear and his water bottle. In other words, a second time he could have killed David. I could have killed Saul, but David didn't. Saul goes back home. David continues to hide. Then David goes back to Gath, the Philistine city. And there he stays some period of time. He and his men go and they live there for 16 months. They actually attack the neighbors on behalf with the Philistines, and they attack the neighbors for the Philistines. They are actually a part of the Philistine army. But then when Israel is making their formation to attack the Philistines, the soldiers in the Philistine army are fearful that David and his men will turn on them, and so they ask the king to make him leave. And as a result, David left the Philistine army, fled away. Saul's army engaged the Philistine army, and in that fight, Saul was wounded, and rather than being taken alive and wounded and being killed by the Philistines, he fell on his sword and committed suicide. After leaving the Philistines, David then went and attacked the Amalekites, who had attacked the city of Ziklag and had taken the residents captive. In other words, you've got all this fighting going on, and David and his men are defending Israel in some ways in lieu of Saul and the army of Israel. When the news of Saul's death reaches David, David goes down to Hebron, where he is appointed the king of Judah. Saul's son, Ishbosheth, was made the king of the northern tribes, while David was made the king of Judah. Saul's son was made king by David's general, Abner, and he supports Ishbosheth for 2 years, and then Abner defects to David, and Ishbosheth, fearful for his life, is assassinated. After his death, then David is made king over all of Israel. So Ishbosheth rules for 2 years, and when Abner is no longer supporting him, he becomes fearful. He's trying to hide, but he's murdered by his own men, and David becomes king. In 2 Samuel 8:5, it reads, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Now, David had a relationship with Saul, with Jonathan, and with Saul's daughter, Michal. And we need to look at that a little bit before we start the lesson. Saul obviously disliked David, was jealous of David. He even hated David. He wanted to kill him. He was constantly trying to kill him. On the other hand, twice David had the opportunity to kill Saul, but he spared Saul's life. David treated Saul with reverence and respect and humility. He treated Saul as God's anointed. Idea was God made him king. God will be the one to remove him as king. Saul, speaking to David in 1 Samuel 24, said, I know that you will surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. So there is this relationship between David and Saul, in which Saul hates David. David has been merciful and gracious to Saul, and where Saul recognizes that David is to be the next king, and he asks for this commitment from David. Now, Michal was the daughter of Saul, second daughter, and David married her. Yet she too turned against her father and spared David when Saul was trying to kill David. The other relationship that we look at in preparation for the lesson is that with Jonathan. Now, Jonathan was the son of Saul. Jonathan was the heir apparent. Jonathan David made a covenant. Jonathan, at one point in time, gave him his robe and his sword, the symbols of royalty. Um, Jonathan warned David when Saul was trying to kill him. 1 Samuel 20:24. Jonathan said to David, this is after Jonathan had warned David Saul was going to try to kill him and suggested that David flee. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is our witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." So they had made a pact of friendship. That last meeting the two had. Of course, what happens is in the battle with the Philistines, in which Saul is killed, Jonathan and two of his brothers are also killed. And of course, that word gets back to David, and David realizes he has lost a very close friend. And so that brings us to 2 Samuel chapter 9. And let me start the lesson by reading just a couple verses here. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "Your servant," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is in the house of Machir, son of Amini, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, the son of Amini. Situation is, David is now firmly in control. David is now firmly the king of all of Israel. Some time has passed by. Now, the reason I'm going to suggest this is, I have to get a little ahead of the story, but it needs to put it into a time perspective. When the word comes of Saul's death and Jonathan's death, we read elsewhere that the servant that was taking care of young Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, took him and was attempting to flee because she was afraid the same people that killed Ishbosheth would come and kill the son of Jonathan. In doing so, she tripped, and Mephibosheth became lame. In other words, he injured both feet and left him crippled for life. So he would have been a small child at that point in time. What we're going to find at the end of our passage today is that when Mephibosheth comes to live in David's house, he brings with him his small child. In other words, he is grown up and by implication has a wife and has a child. So there's been a considerable period of time passed between the death of Saul, the death of Ishbosheth, and now this incident here. But with this time passing, now David remembers. And he asked the question, does Saul have any family members surviving? Now, there is a good reason for a new king to ask that question. And the reason back then was the new king would make sure that he executed all the surviving members of the prior king so that he had no rivals, so that there wouldn't be anyone challenging him for the throne. And it's obvious when David asked this question, that could have raised considerable fear. Now, when he asked, what we know is that Saul did have some sons that survived. What we know is that besides Jonathan, two other sons were killed in battle, and later on we're going to find that some sons of Saul are killed by David in response to the Gibeonites. So there were some other sons besides of Jonathan and besides Mephibosheth. But he asked, is there anyone left of Saul's house to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? He is specifically bringing up the name of Jonathan because he had made that commitment to Jonathan. David asked the question, I want to show kindness. He said, is there someone I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now, this Hebrew word he uses, kindness here, was also used in that conversation between Jonathan and David at their last meeting. 1 Samuel 20:14. Jonathan was speaking. He says to David, but show me unfailing kindness, like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So David had made a commitment to Jonathan that he would show his kindness to Jonathan's family. And so now that's what he asked. Is there someone left of Saul's family to whom I can show this kindness that I had promised to Jonathan? Impliedly, when he asked the question, none of his servants right there knew, because they said, well, there is a servant named Ziba. In other words, we don't know, but there is a servant of Saul named Ziba. Maybe he will know. There's a member of Saul's household named Ziba. Verse 2, now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David. So they did not have the answer themselves. They called for Ziba. Now, for Ziba to go in there, that would be dangerous. Ziba had to be fearful as well. David could have ordered him to be killed, because he might still be loyal to Saul and Saul's family. But Ziba appeared, and when David asked him, are you Ziba? He says, at your service. I'm your servant. Humbly, respectfully saying, yes. Verse 3 is David's question. Is there no one still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Again, using that word kindness. His statement clearly shows he was not intending to kill. His statement should have put to rest any anxiety that David wanted members of Saul's house to kill. At least that's what he was saying. Ziba explained that there was a son of Jonathan, that would be a grandson of Saul, who was still alive, but he was lame in both feet. Why would he bring up the issue of him being lame? Very probably to suggest to David, he's not a rival. He's not a threat. Why, he's lame in both feet. He would be no match for you. He's not of kingship material. He's not a threat. Maybe that's why he was saying. Now, it is interesting that over in Chronicles, First Chronicles, we're told that Mephibosheth's name was Merib-Baal. And some have taken from that maybe Saul had turned to worshiping Baal and had named, had Jonathan name his grandson a fighter against Baal. I don't know. But here we're told his name is Mephibosheth. Elsewhere we're told his name is Merib-Baal. Again, he's lame in both feet. We know the story. I told you the story earlier. He was lame in his feet. He was crippled when he fell or was tripped or fell on when they were trying to escape the potential danger upon news of the death of Saul and his sons. And where is he? Where is he at now? And he was told he was in the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-Debar. Now, we're not sure exactly where Lo-Debar is. Some suggest that this was north of the Dead Sea and east of the Jordan River, in an area where Ishbosheth lived. Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, who became king for 2 years on Saul's death, had his palace there. And they suggest that this Lo-debar was near that, and that would make sense that the king's nephew would be, in effect, living close by. We don't know exactly who Machir is. We're told in other scriptural accounts that he was the brother of Bathsheba, which would mean that he will later become David's brother-in-law. But whomever this Machir is, he is hiding. He is keeping and caring for Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth. So in verse 5, we're told that they sent for the boy to be brought from the house of Machir up in Lo-debar, assuming David sent his servants. May have sent Ziba, but sent his servants. Can you imagine the fear it brought into Mephibosheth's heart when he hears, after this long time, the king wants me to come to him? Would cause fear that nothing good is about to come out of this, that the king is ready to eliminate all rivals. But we find that they sent for him, and in verse 6 we're told, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay honor. He responded. He was called. Now, like I said, he brings with him a son, so he's an adult. He responds to David's invitation, and he comes down. Interesting to note, it says he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. The NIV translation there is simply that he bowed down to show respect, to show humility. The King James and several other translations translate that as he fell on his face. More than just a bow or a curtsy. He fell on his face to show humility, to show respect, to show homage. It's probable that up until this point in time, since he didn't even know he was alive, David and Mephibosheth had never met. They did not know each other. So David calling him by name would be natural. Are you Mephibosheth? And Mephibosheth responded, your servant. Again, an act of humility, an act of obedience. Your servant. David, knowing what's probably going on in Mephibosheth's mind, then responds, don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belongs to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. David had made a commitment to show kindness to Jonathan's family. And now David is going to keep that promise. And it is not just a simple, I'm going to be kind, but we're talking about generous. We're talking about grace beyond expectation, making good on his promise. He says, I'm going to restore to you all the land that your grandfather, the king, owned. Now this would be considerable land, considerable holdings. Think of the contrast. He's been hiding out in Lo-debar. He's been hiding out up there afraid. And now he is going to receive all of the land that the former king owned. And in addition to that, he is going to eat at the king's table regularly. Impliedly, he, his wife, and his child. They're going to eat at the king's table regularly. They are going to get the choicest of food, but more importantly, they're going to be in the presence of the king. This is even more gracious than just giving them land. David is making good on his promise to Jonathan that he would show him kindness. Mephibosheth responds. He says, Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" I've heard this language before about the dead dog. Remember when David was talking to Saul, he said, why are you out to kill and why are you out hunting me, a flea, like a dead dog? A dead dog would be that which would be absolutely worthless, of no value. He says, why are you taking notice of me? Why are you paying attention to like a dead dog? Now, this is self-derogation. This is humility. This is hyperbole, if you will. Now, this hyperbole is characteristic of writings and speaking in the culture of that particular day. But on the other hand, we also may consider it this way. He's been in hiding for a long time now. He may have lost all of his self-esteem about being the grandson of a king. I mean, he's been in hiding. He's been afraid to get out. There's been every reason for him to want to avoid the limelight. And so it may be that when he called himself a dead dog, he was thinking, my life is as good as dead because I'm the son of the prior king, a grandson of the prior king. So he is really shocked when he is suddenly now receiving this kind of treatment. He says, what is your servant? Why are you doing this? Of what reason would you give such generosity, make such a generous gift to one such as me, a dead dog? Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba had a large household, 15 sons and 20 servants. On the other hand, though, this large household would now be put to work and would be needed to manage and farm the fields and farms that Saul would have owned. So there was plenty of work for Ziba's family to do. And David, the king, instructed them, you're to go out, farm those fields, produce a crop, and bring the profits off of that operation to your grandson's, to your master's grandson. Now, he's saying, Mephibosheth and his family, they're going to eat at the king's table. But they're going to need the funds raised off of the farming of Saul's land. That will be needed to support them and provide for them an existence. They'll have something to eat. They'll eat at the king's table, but this will provide for them. So now Mephibosheth's been taken care of, and Ziba's family has been put to work. Mephibosheth, no longer in fear, no longer hiding, no longer in poverty, and even though he may be lame, no longer disabled. This was David showing kindness to Jonathan's son, just as he promised. He made good on that promise to Jonathan the many years before. This lesson teaches us the importance of keeping a promise. This lesson teaches us about David's example of friendship. This lesson teaches us about David's example of grace. One writer put it this way: we should seek out our enemies and seek to bless them, looking at David as the example. We should look to the poor, weak, lame, and hidden to bless them. We should bless others when they don't deserve it, and bless them more than they deserve. We should bless others for the sake of someone else. We must show the kindness of God to others. David models all of this for us. Another writer has said this lesson has, we can see in the characters of this lesson the whole story of God's plan for mankind. Man, we are like Mephibosheth, weak, poor, and lame. We've been separated from our king by the decision of our parents, Adam and Eve. We have been separated from our king because we did not realize his love for us. And the king, David, has sought us out. He sought us before we sought him. The king's act was based upon his covenant that he had made. To receive the king's love, we must humble ourselves and receive it. It's not what we do. Just humble ourselves and receive it. Mephibosheth. The king returns to us what we were supposed to be. We were made for fellowship with God. The gift, what the king gives us is a reconciled relationship so we can be what we were made to be. But it gives us back so much more than we lost. We are given provisions. The king's presence, the king's provisions, the king's protection. And then we are made sons and daughters of the kings, servants of the king. Now, when the king does not necessarily immediately take away all of our weaknesses and all of our lameness, but he gives us favor and standing. He enables us and equips us so that we can overcome the sting and change the way we think about ourselves. This is a great example of how God treats us. He made a covenant. He keeps his promise. David made a covenant. He kept his promise. David was more than gracious, and so is God. And the thing I would emphasize here is, and what did Mephibosheth do to receive this kindness? He humbled himself and received it. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your kindness, your mercy, your grace that you bestow upon us. And Father, even right now, we would pause and again humble ourselves and receive. We would ask that your presence would be with us. Nothing we can do to earn it, or nothing we can do to force it, but we simply receive. You have promised, you have covenanted. You're faithful to keep your promise. And Father, help us that we might likewise keep our promises. Help us that we might likewise be as gracious and generous to those that we come in contact with, even the one who may be our enemy. May we have that love. May we see others through the eyes of Christ. For it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Thank you.